Go refill the coolers. It's the one thing you're good for. My sister said it across 40 people at the 4th of July cookout, and she was smiling when she said it. My parents laughed. For 6 years, I had paid the mortgage on the house we were all standing in front of, paid it openly, by check, every month, while they called it me helping out. Nobody at that grill knew the woman being told to fetch ice was the only reason there was a house to fetch it for. I set down the tongs, I kissed my kids. I drove home, and I did not come back. That morning, she still thought she'd won. I'm Susannah, 33, and the daughter they sent for ice was the same daughter whose name was on the loan that kept their lights on. Let me take you back to the start of that day because the heat is the part I can't forget. It was already 91 degrees by 10 in the morning, the kind of July where the asphalt on Linden Court goes soft, and the cicadas don't bother starting up because it's too hot, even for them. I'd been at the house since 8. My parents' house, technically. The house I'd been paying for since I was 27. I want to be careful here because the thing about my family was never loud. There was no screaming, no thrown plates. For a long time, I thought that meant we were fine. It took me years to understand that the quietest cruelty is the kind everyone agrees is normal. My sister's name is Brooke. She's 2 years younger than me, and from the day she was born, she was the answer to a question our parents never stopped asking. The question was, who is going to make this family special? The answer was always Brooke. She was the pretty one, the talented one, the one with the smile that made strangers want to give her things. And to be fair, strangers did. Teachers gave her grades she didn't earn. Coaches gave her starting positions. My father gave her a car for her 16th birthday and gave me a folded 20 and a ride to my shift. I'm not telling you that to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you understand the math of our house. There were 2 daughters, and one of them was the future, and one of them was the budget. I was the budget. That morning, I was setting up folding tables on the lawn while Brooke sat in the shade with a sweating glass of lemonade, narrating how I should do it. Susannah, those need to go closer to the deck. I moved them closer to the deck. No, that's too close now. People need to walk. I moved them back 6 inches. My mother watched from the kitchen window and said nothing, which in our family counted as approval of Brooke. Here is the thing I knew that morning that none of them did. I knew that on the 15th of every month, a payment of $2,100 left my checking account and landed against the mortgage on this house. I knew I had made that payment 71 times. I knew that without it, the bank would have taken the house 3 years ago. The summer, my father's contracting business folded, and he started telling people he'd decided to retire. He hadn't decided anything. The money had decided for him, and the money was me. But I'm getting ahead. Let me go back to the heat and the tables, and the moment my mother called me inside. She was standing at the counter with a stack of paper plates, and she didn't look up. Brooke's bringing the Hendersons, she said, and the Coils, so we'll be closer to 45 than 30. You'll cover the extra meat? It wasn't a question. In our house, it was never a question. Sure, I said. And the propane. The big tank's almost out. I'll get it. She nodded, still not looking up. The way you nod at an appliance that's working. I drove to the warehouse store in the worst of the morning heat and bought $110 of ground chuck and chicken thighs and 2 cases of water and a propane tank that cost more than I want to admit, and I told myself the same thing I always told myself. This is just what I do. Somebody has to. I didn't know yet that somebody has to was the sentence I'd been handed at birth, like a name. By noon, the yard was filling up. My father stood at the grill in a flag apron a neighbor had given him, holding the tongs like a scepter, accepting compliments on his cookout. People love my father. He has the gift of making you feel like the most important person at the party for exactly 90 seconds before he moves on. He'd built a whole life on those 90 seconds. I carried things. That was my role, and I knew it. I carried the meat from the kitchen, and I carried the folding chairs from the garage, and I carried my 4-year-old Wren on my hip when she got overwhelmed by the noise, and I carried my 7-year-old Theo back from the street twice when he chased a ball too close to the road. My husband, Paul, was deployed. He's a flight medic, gone 4 months by then with 2 more to go, and the kids felt his absence like weather. So I carried that too. Nobody asked if I needed a chair. I want to stop here and tell you about the propane tank, because it matters later, and because it's the kind of small thing that turns out to be the whole story. When I set it down by the grill, my father glanced at it and said, "Good girl." Not "thank you." Good girl. To a 33-year-old woman who'd just spent her own money to fuel a party in her honor that wasn't in her honor at all. I smiled. I'd gotten very good at smiling. Then I went back to carrying. Around 1 o'clock, the heat broke 100. People moved into the strip of shade along the fence. The Hendersons arrived with a cooler. The Coyles arrived with their college-age son, who Brooke immediately started performing for. And my sister, who had not carried a single thing all day, stood up in the middle of the lawn with a fresh glass of lemonade and surveyed the party like she'd built it herself. That's when she noticed the coolers were getting low on ice. I was across the yard, kneeling, wiping ketchup off Wren's chin. I heard my sister's voice carry, the way it always did, pitched to be overheard. "Susannah." Then louder because I hadn't snapped to attention fast enough. "Susannah!" I looked up. "Go refill the coolers." A pause for the audience. "It's the one thing you're good for." And my parents laughed. Not a cruel laugh. That's the part that took the breath out of me. It was an easy laugh, a fond laugh, the laugh of people agreeing with something so obvious it was funny. My mother actually said, "She's not wrong," and shook her head like Brooke had told a charming joke about a pet. 40 people. Some of them heard it. Most of them didn't. The Coyle boy laughed because Brooke was laughing. A cicada finally started up somewhere, too late. And I knelt there in the grass with a ketchup-stained napkin in my hand and felt something I had never let myself feel before. Not anger, I want to be honest, because anger would have been easier. What I felt was clarity. But I'm getting ahead of myself again, and this is where I have to make you a promise. Stay with me, because what I did next surprised even me. And the reason this story matters isn't the cookout at all. It's the 71 months that came before it, and the one decision that ended them. Let me take you back to how a person becomes a budget. I should tell you when it started, because there was a beginning, even if it didn't feel like one. I was 27. I'd just finished my training as a nurse anesthetist. 3 years of school on top of nursing school, the kind of program where you don't sleep and you don't quit. It's a good job, a serious job. You hold people's breathing in your hands while a surgeon does the loud, visible work everyone thanks afterward. I was the one who kept them alive quietly. Even my career was a metaphor I didn't notice. The week I got my first real paycheck, my mother called me, not to congratulate me, to tell me about the house. "Your father's having a hard stretch," she said. "The business. It's temporary. We just need a little help with the mortgage. A few months." "A few months. I want you to hold on to those 2 words. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Of course I said yes. They were my parents and they were in trouble and I had a good job and a number in my account I'd never seen before. $2,100 a month. It felt like nothing the first time. It felt like being needed, which I had been waiting my whole life to feel. The few months became a year. The year became 3. The business that was temporary quietly became my father's retirement, and the help that was just for now quietly became the foundation the whole house stood on. And here is the part that I need you to understand, because it's the heart of everything. It was never a secret. Everyone knew. That's not how these stories usually go, I know. Usually the quiet daughter pays in the dark and saves the receipts for a dramatic reveal. That's not what this was. My family knew I paid the mortgage. We talked about it at dinner. My mother referred to it the way you'd refer to the weather. Well, Susannah's got the house handled, so. It was a fact of the family, like my father's bad knee or Brooke's allergy to shellfish. They just decided it didn't count. That's the trick, and it took me years to see it. They didn't hide what I did. They simply agreed, all of them, without ever saying it out loud, that it wasn't anything. It was just Susannah. It was the one thing she was good for. Stay with me. Because the cruelty of that wasn't loud. It was 1,000 small days. And the day it finally added up to something is the day I want to take you back to. But first you have to meet Brooke, really meet her, because if you only see the woman at the cookout, you'll think she's a cartoon. She wasn't. That's what made it worse. Brooke believed every word she said. That's the thing I need you to understand about my sister. She wasn't lying when she told that party I was good for fetching ice. In her mind, it was simply true, the way it's true that water is wet. You have to understand how she was made. From the time she was small, our parents told her a story about herself, and they told it so often and so completely that it became the only story she knew. She was the one who was going to do something. She was the talent. She was the family's investment, and I was the family's overhead. So, when our father's business failed and the money started coming from me, it didn't change Brooke's story. It couldn't. In her story, money was something the overhead provided so the talent could keep shining. My checks didn't make me important to her. They confirmed what I was for. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I'm describing a monster, but she'd drive an hour to bring me soup when I had the flu. She remembered my kids' birthdays. She cried real tears at my wedding. She was a whole person, which is exactly why it took me so long to leave. You can walk away from a monster in an afternoon. It takes years to walk away from a sister who loves you and has never once, in 31 years, seen you. Let me show you what I mean, because telling you isn't enough. 2 years before the cookout, Brooke decided she was going to become a wellness coach. There had been other careers: the boutique that closed in 8 months, the photography business that never booked a second client, the essential oils thing nobody discusses anymore. Each one had been the future. Each one had been funded. This time she needed $11,000 for a certification program and a website and a starter inventory of products. She didn't ask me. She asked our parents at Sunday dinner in front of me, knowing exactly how the request would travel. "It's an investment in the family's future," my father said, nodding the way he nodded at things he liked. Then he looked at me. Not asking, informing. "Susannah, you could float the certification part, couldn't you? Keep it in the family?" And I looked at my mother, who was smiling at Brooke, and at Brooke, who was already thanking me, and I understood that the decision had been made in a room I wasn't invited to. I floated the certification part, $6,000. The wellness business lasted 5 months. Stay with me, because that $6,000 comes back, and not the way you'd think. But first, I need you to feel the weight I was carrying, so the day I set it down means something. People ask me now, the few I've told, why I didn't just stop, why I didn't say no, and I understand the question. From the outside, it looks simple. You have a job, you have your own family, you have a checking account that's bleeding $2,000 a month into a house you don't live in. Just stop. But money was never the thing holding me there. I want to be clear about that, because it would be a cleaner story if it were. I made good money. I could have stopped writing the checks any month and survived. What held me was the hope. That's the wound, and I'll name it plainly so you don't have to guess. What I wanted, more than I have ever wanted anything, was for my family to want me for myself, not for my money, not for my carrying, for me. I kept paying because some animal part of me believed that if I gave enough, did enough, carried enough, one day they'd look up from whatever Brooke was doing and see that I'd been there the whole time. That I mattered. That I was a daughter and not a budget. Every check was a question I was too afraid to ask out loud. The question was, do you love me, or do you love what I provide? And every month the answer came back the same, and every month I told myself I'd misread it. I need to tell you about Paul because he's the one who saw it first, and because for a long time he was the only person who did. We'd been married 6 years by then. He's quiet like me, which is a thing people don't understand. They think 2 quiet people make a quiet marriage. They make the opposite. 2 quiet people notice everything. And from the start, Paul noticed the thing about my family that I'd spent my whole life not letting myself notice. The first Thanksgiving I brought him, he watched me get up to clear the table while Brooke stayed seated. Watched my mother hand me a stack of dishes without looking at me. Watched my father praise Brooke's interesting points about a news story she'd half read. And in the car afterward, Paul didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said one sentence. "You're a guest in your own family." I got angry at him. That's the part I'm not proud of. I defended them. I told him he didn't understand, that this was just how we were, that he was reading it wrong. I made him take it back, because the truth he'd handed me was a truth I couldn't afford yet. The mortgage payments hadn't even started. The hope was still young and strong. But he never stopped seeing it. He just stopped saying it because he loved me, and he understood something it took me years to understand. You cannot talk a person out of hoping. You can only stand beside them until the hoping wears out on its own. When the deployment came, the calls were short and strange. A satellite delay, his voice arriving a half-second late, like it had to travel through everything I was carrying to reach me. And in March, the night Wren was in the hospital, after my mother told me I was too strong to need her, I called Paul. It was the middle of the night where he was too. He picked up on the first ring. He didn't tell me I was strong. That's what I remember. He said, "I'm so sorry I'm not there. Tell me everything. I'm not going anywhere. Talk to me until she wakes up." And he stayed on that line, 8,000 miles away, in a war, while a machine beeped beside my daughter's bed, and he asked me the questions my family never asked. Are you scared? Have you eaten? Who's with Theo? What do you need? I cried in that hallway, finally, because someone had asked me what I needed. It was the first time in months, and it came from the one person in my life who wasn't getting anything from me except me. Stay with me, because the contrast between that phone call and the one before it is the whole reason I was able, 4 months later, to set down the tongs. There was one more person who saw it, and I should tell you about her too, because she said the thing that finally gave me language for what I was. Her name is Dana. We work together. She's a surgical nurse, 15 years older than me, the kind of woman who's seen everything and stopped being polite about it around year 10. One night that spring, after a long case, we were charting side by side at the station, and she asked, the way you ask things at 2 in the morning, why I always looked tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. I told her. Not all of it, but the shape of it. The mortgage, the parties I funded, the sister, the running tab of a family that never balanced. Donna put down her pen. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said the sentence I've never been able to unhear. "Sweetheart," she said, "you're not the daughter, you're the donor." I laughed because it was awful, and then I didn't laugh because it was true. The donor, the one whose body keeps something else alive and gets wheeled out of the room before the thank yous and is expected to be grateful for the chance. "You can stop donating, you know," Dana said, picking her pen back up like she hadn't just rearranged my whole life. "Bodies aren't supposed to give forever. That's not generosity, that's bleeding." I went home that night and stood in the doorway of my kids' room and listened to them breathe, and I thought about the difference between giving and bleeding and how long it had been since I'd been able to tell which one I was doing. Giving has a bottom. You give, and then you're empty, and then you stop, and then you fill back up. Bleeding has no bottom. You just go gray, slowly, while everyone around you marvels at how strong you are. I'd been bleeding for 71 months, and the people I was bleeding for had a word for it. They called it me being good with money. Stay with me, because that word, donor, is the word I carried into the cookout, and it's the word that was sitting in my chest when my sister told 40 people what I was good for. Let me take you forward now, to the spring before the cookout, because that's when the answer finally got too loud to misread. It was March. Wren had been sick, a bad ear infection that turned into something scarier. 3 days in the children's hospital with a fever that wouldn't break. Paul was already deployed. I was alone in a vinyl chair beside a crib for 72 hours, holding my daughter's hand through the bars, doing the math of how I'd cover the unpaid leave on top of the mortgage I was still paying. I called my mother from the hospital hallway at 2 in the morning. I didn't ask for money. I want you to know that. I asked for her. I asked if she could come sit with me or take Theo for a few days or just stay on the phone. "Oh, honey," she said, "you know I can't drive at night. And Brooke's got her launch event this weekend, the new program. We're all helping with that. But you're so strong. You've always been the strong one. You don't need me hovering." The new program. The wellness business had died and been reborn under a new name, and the whole family was rallying around the launch event for a business that would close. Again by August, and I stood in that hospital hallway at 2 in the morning, my sick child behind one door and my whole family pouring themselves into a party behind another, and I finally heard the answer to my question. They loved what I provided. They had never, not once, loved me. I want to tell you that's the moment I left. It wasn't. The wound doesn't close that fast. I went back into Wren's room and I held her hand and I kept paying the mortgage for 4 more months, because the hope is a stubborn animal and it dies slow. But something had shifted. A door I'd kept shut my whole life had come open a crack, and through it I could see the shape of a life where I stopped asking the question, where I stopped needing the answer. And then, 2 weeks after Ren came home from the hospital, my family did the thing that pried the door the rest of the way open. They asked for more. It was April. My mother called, her voice in the bright casual register that always meant a number was coming. "We've been thinking," she said. "The kitchen's so dated. Brooke says if we ever want to host properly, it needs a real renovation. And you're so good with the bank, honey. We thought you could look into a home equity line. It's our house, so it's not like it's really borrowing. It's our house." 26 years they'd lived there, and somewhere in their minds it was still entirely theirs, even though the only reason it was still theirs was the transfer that left my account on the 15th. The kitchen renovation had a number, and the number was $18,000 for a kitchen so that Brooke, who didn't cook, who lived in an apartment across town, who would post photographs of the new countertops as if they were her own, could host properly. And I want you to understand where I was standing when she asked. I was standing in my own kitchen, the one I actually cooked in, with a sticky note on the fridge that said, "Ren, follow-up audiology," because the infection had cost my daughter some hearing in her left ear, and we didn't yet know if it would come back. I was standing in front of a medical bill I hadn't opened, on a Tuesday 2 weeks out from the war zone, and my mother was asking me to find $18,000 so her daughter's countertops would photograph well. I said I'd think about it. That was new. I'd never said, "I'll think about it," before. I'd always said, yes. And the silence on the line after I said it, the small, startled silence, told me she'd heard the difference too. That sticky note is the thing I want you to hold on to. Ren. Follow-up audiology, in my own handwriting, stuck to my own fridge on the day my family asked me to finance a kitchen. Because 3 months later, in the worst minute of the cookout, that note was what I saw in my mind. Not the tables, not the tongs. That note. I didn't say no to the renovation, not yet. The hope is a stubborn animal. But I didn't say yes either, and for the first time in 71 months, a request from my family went unanswered, and the world did not end. The discovery that I could leave a question hanging, that I could simply not answer and survive, was the first muscle of leaving I ever used. Stay with me, because once you learn you cannot answer, you start to wonder what else you've been answering out of habit. But something had shifted, deeper now. The door wasn't a crack anymore. I could see the whole room on the other side of it, and the room was a life where the question of whether they loved me had simply stopped being a question I asked. Stay with me because the cookout is coming, and now you know why a woman would set down a pair of tongs and not pick them up again. Let me catch you up before I go on, because I know how much I'm asking of you, sitting with all this. So if you've ever been the one in your family who holds everything together while everyone else gets to fall apart, if you've ever been thanked with the words, "You're so strong," right when you needed someone to be strong for you, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, and do me a favor. Tell me in the comments what state you're listening from, because I have a feeling there are more of us out there than anyone admits. Now let me take you back to the heat and the coolers, and the moment everything I'd been carrying finally had somewhere to go. After Ren came home from the hospital, the spring turned into one long, quiet reckoning. I didn't announce anything. I'm not a person who announces things. But I started noticing the family the way you notice the house you're about to move out of, seeing the cracks you'd trained yourself to ignore. I noticed that my parents never asked about Paul. Their son-in-law was in a war zone, and they never once asked how he was, or how I was doing without him, or whether the kids were okay. They asked when I was coming to help with Brooke's events. I noticed that Theo had stopped expecting his grandparents to come to his baseball games. He was 7 and he'd already learned the thing it took me 30 years to learn. He'd stopped asking the question. That one nearly broke me. Watching my son make himself smaller so it wouldn't hurt when they didn't show up. I'd done that. I'd taught him to do that without meaning to, by example, by making myself the kind of person whose needs were always negotiable. There was one game in May I'll never forget. Theo had been picked to pitch for the first time, a huge thing for a 7-year-old, and he'd asked shyly whether Grandma and Grandpa might come. I made the mistake of asking them. My mother said they'd try. That word, try, in my family, was a closed door wearing the costume of an open one. So I told Theo they were coming because I wanted just once, for the hope I'd carried to be true for him instead of crushing him the way it had crushed me. And on game day, he kept looking at the bleachers between pitches. Looking, and pitching, and looking. They didn't come. They were at Brooke's again. She was filming content for the relaunch and needed bodies in the background. After the game, Theo didn't cry. That was the worst part. He just took my hand and said, "It's okay, Mom." They were probably busy. 7 years old, already making excuses for the people who didn't show, already learning to swallow the disappointment so it wouldn't show on his face. Already becoming me. I sat in the car after that game and gripped the wheel and made a promise I didn't fully understand yet. Not him, I thought, whatever it costs. Not him. Stay with me, because that promise is the one that walked me out of the cookout 2 months later. It wasn't really about me at all. I decided, somewhere in that spring, that whatever else happened, my children were not going to learn that they were the budget. Not from me. Not from anyone. I just didn't know yet what that decision would cost. In May, my father called. This was unusual. He didn't call me. He had my mother do that. But he called, and his voice had the warm, important tone he used when he wanted something. "Susannah, listen. Your mother and I have been thinking about the 4th. We want to do something big this year. 40, 50 people. Show the neighborhood we're still, still us. Still us. Still the family that mattered, in the house that I paid for." "That sounds nice, Dad." "It does, doesn't it? So we'll need you to handle the food situation. And the rentals, tables, chairs, the big tent in case it rains. Brooke's going to do the decorating. She's got such an eye. We just thought you could take care of the logistics. The logistics, the money, the carrying. I'll take care of it," I said, and I heard my own voice come out flat and obedient. The voice of a woman who'd been saying yes for 71 months, and I hated it. But I said it. Because the hope is a stubborn animal, and there was still a sliver of me that thought, maybe this year, maybe at this party, in front of all these people, they'll finally say it. "Thank you, Susannah. We see you, Susannah. We couldn't do any of this without you. I spent $800 on rentals. I spent another $400 on food. I want you to hold those numbers not because they're large, but because of what they bought. They bought me a seat at a party where my own sister would tell 40 people the one thing I was good for was fetching ice. That's the math of being the budget. You pay for the room, and they charge you rent to stand in it. Now, let me take you back to that yard, to 1 o'clock on the 4th of July, because I left you kneeling in the grass with a ketchup napkin in my hand and clarity in my chest, and I owe you what happened in the next 60 seconds, because those 60 seconds were 33 years in the making. It's the one thing you're good for." The laugh, my mother's voice. "She's not wrong." I stayed on my knees a moment longer than I needed to, finishing wiping Wren's chin, because I have learned that the most dangerous thing you can do is move before you know what you're doing. And kneeling there, I did something I'd never let myself do at a family gathering. I looked around the yard slowly, and I counted. I counted the rented tables I'd paid for, 8 of them. I counted the chairs, 40. I'd paid for those too. I counted the meat on the grill, the propane tank fueling it, the tent overhead, the coolers I was being ordered to fill, the ice in the coolers, the house behind it all with its fresh coat of paint that my father had splurged on in April, using money that was, if you followed the dollars far enough back, mine. I had built this, every board and burger of it, and I was being sent for ice in front of 40 people as a joke by a woman who believed it was the kindest possible way to describe my worth. I stood up. I want to tell you I made a speech. I didn't. The voice that lives in this family is calm, and for once I was going to use that voice for myself instead of against myself. I picked up Wren. I called Theo over from the fence. I did not raise my voice. "We're going home, sweethearts," I said. "That's it. That's the whole line. Stay with me, because the silence after it is the loudest thing I have ever heard." My mother noticed first. She has a sense for disruptions to the surface of things. "Susannah, where are you going? The party just started." "Home," I said. "The kids are tired." It wasn't true, and everyone could tell it wasn't true, and that was the point. A lie everyone can see is a kind of message. Brooke laughed again, but it had a different sound now, a hairline crack of uncertainty in it. "Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. I was kidding." "You know I was kidding." I know, I said, and I did know. That was the worst part. She was always kidding, and she always meant it. My father set down the tongs, the scepter, and walked toward me with his 90-second smile already loading. Susannah, sweetheart, you can't just leave, And here he stopped, because he was about to say a true thing in front of 40 people, and he caught himself a half-second too late. I'm what, Dad? The yard had gone quiet in that way yards do when the people in them realize a real thing is happening. The Hendersons looked at their shoes. The coil boy stopped performing. Even the cicadas, I swear, took a breath. Your family, he finished, limply. It wasn't what he'd been about to say. What he'd been about to say was, you can't just leave, you're paying for all of this. And we both knew it, and I watched him realize that I knew it. And for 1 second, 1 single second in 33 years, my father looked at me and actually saw me, saw the woman who'd kept his roof on, his lights bright, his story alive, saw what he'd spent. Then the fear crossed his face. Not guilt, fear, the fear of a man doing fast arithmetic. I'm getting ahead of myself. Stay with me, because that look on my father's face is where this story turns, and I need you to understand exactly what he was afraid of, because it wasn't losing me. He wasn't afraid of losing his daughter. Let me be precise about that, because it's the whole truth of my family in a single second of a single afternoon. When my father did the math and his face changed, the number that scared him wasn't the number of years he'd had me and never seen me. It was $2,100 a month. He was afraid of losing the budget. Let's all just take a breath, my mother said, doing the thing she did, smoothing the surface, because in our family, a problem that's gone quiet is a problem that's solved. Susannah, you're upset. That's fine. We'll talk later. Put Ren down and have some lemonade. I'm not upset, I said. And the thing is, I wasn't. That's what none of them could process. Upset they could handle. Upset has a shape. You wait it out, you wait for the strong one to get strong again. But I wasn't upset. I was finished. And finished doesn't have a shape they recognized because no one had ever been finished with them before. Brooke stepped in front of me, close. Her voice dropped so only I could hear it, and for the first time all day, it was honest. You're really going to embarrass everyone over a joke? And I looked at my little sister. The future, the talent, the one our parents built a whole family around. And I saw that she genuinely could not understand what was happening. In her story, I didn't get to leave. The overhead doesn't leave. The overhead stays and pays and fetches the ice. Brooke, I said gently because I did love her, that was the tragedy of it. I'm not embarrassing anyone, I'm just going home. I shifted Ren on my hip. I took Theo's hand, and I walked across the lawn I had paid for, past the tables I had rented, under the tent I had bought, toward the gate. Behind me, my mother's voice rose for the first time all day. Susannah, you are being ridiculous. Get back here, Susannah! I didn't turn around. Stay with me, because walking out of that yard was the easy part. The hard part started in the car when Theo asked me a question I'll be answering for the rest of my life. I buckled Ren into her car seat. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I'd expected them to shake. Theo climbed into the back and looked at me in the rearview mirror with those serious 7-year-old eyes, the ones that had already learned to stop asking for things. Mom, he said, did we do something wrong? And there it was. The question. The one I'd carried my whole life, passed down to my son like an heirloom I never wanted to give him. I turned around in the driver's seat so I could look at him directly. The car was already hot, the vinyl burning through my shirt, the July sun pressing down on the roof like a hand. No, baby, I said. We didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people we love can only love us if we make ourselves small, and we're done being small, that's all. That's the only thing that happened today. He thought about it. Then he nodded, the way kids do when they understand something they don't have the words for yet. Okay, he said, and then, after a minute, can we get ice cream? I laughed. It came out cracked and wet, and I hadn't even known I was crying. Yeah, I said. Yeah, we can get ice cream. We drove away from Linden Court with the windows down and the heat pouring in, and I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt like I'd cut off my own arm to stop a bleeding I'd been ignoring for years. It hurt. The right thing and the painless thing are almost never the same thing. Stay with me, because what I did when I got home is the part of this story that's actually about freedom, and it isn't loud either. The first thing I did when I got home was not cancel anything. I want you to know that, because the version of this story where I dramatically cancel the autopay that same night isn't true. The first thing I did was give my kids ice cream and let them watch a movie and sit on the floor of my own living room, my own, paid by me, lived in by me, and feel the strangest sensation I'd felt in years. Quiet, the real kind, the kind that doesn't have a bill attached. My phone lit up. My mother. I let it ring. It rang again. My father this time. I let it ring. A text from Brooke. Wow, real mature. Mom is in tears. Hope you're happy. Then, 20 minutes later, a different text from Brooke because the first one hadn't worked. I'm sorry if the joke hurt your feelings. Come back. We miss you. The Coils are asking where you went. The Coils are asking where you went. Even her apology was about the audience. I didn't answer. I tucked my kids in. And then, at 9 o'clock that night, in the quiet of my kitchen, I opened my banking app. There it was. The recurring payment. $2,100, scheduled for the 15th, the way it had been 71 times. My thumb hovered over the cancel button. Stay with me, because this is the moment everyone thinks is the climax, and it wasn't. The climax already happened in the yard when I picked up my daughter and didn't pick up the tongs. This was just paperwork, but it's the paperwork I want you to sit with because of what went through my mind while my thumb hovered. I thought, if I cancel this, the house is gone in 90 days. My parents will lose it. They're 61 and 59, and they have no plan and no savings and no business, and they will lose the home they've lived in for 26 years, and it will be because of me. That's the part the cleaner version of this story leaves out. Walking away wasn't free. It wasn't a triumphant gotcha. It was choosing, with full knowledge, to let people I loved fall, because I had finally understood that I could not catch them and survive. I want to be honest with you about something because I think it's the most important thing I'll say. I did not cancel the payment that night. I closed the app. I sat in my kitchen, and I gave myself one more week, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to be sure I was leaving for the right reason. I didn't want to cancel that payment out of anger. Anger fades, and a decision made in anger comes back to haunt you when the anger's gone. I wanted to cancel it, if I canceled it, out of something steadier than that. Stay with me, because the week I gave myself is when my family showed me exactly who they were, one last time, and made the decision for me. The phone calls came every day that week, and not one of them was an apology. That's the detail I keep returning to. In 7 days, across maybe 30 calls and texts from 3 different people, not one human being in my family said the words, "I'm sorry I made you feel like that." Not one of them asked if I was okay. Not one of them asked about the kids, or Paul, or the hospital in March that I'd never told them was the night the door came open. What they said instead was this. My mother, day 2. "Your father didn't sleep last night. He's so worried about you. You really frightened us. You need to come apologize so we can all move on." I need to apologize for being told I was good for fetching ice. My father, day 3. "Sweetheart, I think you've made your point. We've all learned our lesson. Now let's not let one bad afternoon turn into something we regret. Family is everything. We've all learned our lesson," as if my leaving had been a tantrum they'd patiently endured. Brooke, day 4, and this is the one that closed the door for good. She called, and she didn't lower her voice this time, and she said, "I talked to Mom about the mortgage. We know you've been stressed about money. So we think maybe you've been resentful about helping out and that's not fair to bring to a party. But we forgive you. We just need to know you're not going to leave them high and dry. They're counting on you. We forgive you. They're counting on you." She'd said it without a flicker of shame because in her story it was simply true. The overhead had thrown a fit, and now the overhead needed to be reminded of its job. There was no version of events in any of their minds where I was a person who had been wronged. There was only a malfunction in the family's machinery, and the machinery needed to be told to get back to work. And when the direct calls didn't fix the malfunction, They did the thing families like mine always do. They widened the circle. On day 5, my Aunt Carol called. My mother's sister, a woman I'd spoken to maybe 4 times in my adult life. She didn't bother with hello. Susannah, I'm going to say this as your aunt who loves you. You are tearing this family apart over a comment at a barbecue, and frankly, I'm shocked. Your mother is beside herself. Whatever this is really about, you need to grow up and fix it. Family doesn't keep score. Family doesn't keep score. From a woman calling on behalf of the people who'd been keeping a tab on me for 71 months. I noticed she didn't ask what this was really about. None of them ever asked. They'd been handed a story, ungrateful Susannah, making a scene. And the story was so much more comfortable than the truth that nobody went looking. On day 6, it was a neighbor, Mrs. Pruitt from 2 doors down on Linden Court, who I'd known since I was a child, who texted me a long paragraph about how my parents were good people going through a hard time and how she'd hate to see them lose the house over a family squabble. Lose the house. So they were already telling the neighborhood that I might let them lose the house, casting me as the villain of a story they were narrating in real time to anyone who'd listen, while leaving out the single fact that explained all of it, that the house had been mine to lose all along. That was the counterattack, and I want you to see it clearly, because it's the part these stories usually skip. When you stop being useful to people who only valued your usefulness, they don't examine themselves. They go to war for the version of you that served them. They recruit. They reframe. They get the aunt and the neighbor and the old family friend to carry the message the machinery couldn't deliver directly. Get back to work. For about an hour on day 6, it almost worked. That's the honest part. I sat with Mrs. Pruitt's text and I felt the old pull, the gravity of being the one who fixes it, and I drafted a reply that started, "I'm sorry for any confusion," and my thumb hovered, and I felt myself sliding back toward the woman who apologized for being told what she was good for. And then Wren walked into the kitchen, half asleep, and asked if Grandma was coming to her kindergarten thing in the fall, and I realized that if I went back now, I'd be teaching her, the same way I'd taught Theo, that this was the price of being loved, that you pay and you carry, and when you finally say enough, the whole world calls to tell you you're the problem. I deleted the draft. Stay with me, because deleting that draft was the moment the week actually decided itself, hours before I touched the banking app again. But there was one more thing that had to happen first, and it happened on the 7th day, and it was my father, and it was the worst and most useful hour of the whole week. He came to my house. He'd never done that. In 7 years, he'd been to my house maybe a handful of times, always for something, never just to be there. But on the 7th evening, his truck pulled into my driveway, and he knocked on my door, and I let him in because some part of me still wanted to be wrong about all of it. He didn't come in angry. That would have been easier. He came in warm with the 90-second smile, the one that had worked on me my whole life. He sat at my kitchen table, the table where I'd been about to make the most expensive decision of my life, and he told me he loved me. He hadn't said that in years. He said it now, and I watched his face while he said it, and I understood with a sadness that went all the way down that he was deploying it. It was a tool. He'd reached for "I love you" the way he reached for the propane tank, because it was the thing the situation required. "I know you've been carrying a lot," he said, "and I should have said thank you more. I see that now. But sweetheart, your mother and we're not young. We can't start over. You're the only one who can—" And there it was. He couldn't even finish the apology without turning it back into the ask. He'd come to say thank you, and within 4 sentences, thank you had become, "You're the only one who can." The gratitude was bait. The hook was the same hook it had always been. "Can what, Dad?" I asked. Calm. I kept it calm. He spread his hands on my table. And then he said the sentence that ended it. He said, "You can't punish us just because you've got resentment. We gave you a good childhood. You owe us this. You owe us this." There it was, finally, said out loud, in my own kitchen, in plain words. Not "we love you," not "we need you." We made you, therefore your money is ours. The whole architecture of 33 years, the entire physics of being the budget, compressed into 4 words and laid on my table like a bill. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to know that. The voice that lives in my family is calm, and I used it for myself one last time. You should go home, Dad, I said. It's getting late. He looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Then the warmth drained out of his face all at once. And what was underneath it was the thing I'd been afraid of my whole life and somehow never seen until that moment. It wasn't love withdrawn. There was no love to withdraw. It was just a man who'd come to collect, finding the account closed. He left without another word. I watched his truck back out of my driveway, and I felt the last thread, the one I'd been protecting for 33 years, go quietly slack. Stay with me, because everything after my father walked out that door was just paperwork, and the paperwork is where I'll take you next. I want you to notice what's not in any of those messages. There's no question. Not one of them asked me a single question. Not, are you all right? Not, did we hurt you? Not, what do you need? Because to ask a question, you have to believe the other person has an inside, a self, a story of their own. And they had never once believed that about me. I was the answer to their needs. Answers don't have questions. I sat with that for a long time on the 7th night in my quiet kitchen. And then I opened the banking app again, and this time my thumb didn't hover. Stay with me, because what I felt when I pressed the button was not what I expected, and it's the whole reason I'm telling you this. I canceled the payment. I want to describe exactly what happened in my body when I did it, because I've thought about it 1,000 times since, and it's the truest thing I know about leaving. I did not feel powerful. There was no rush of victory. The villain didn't fall. Nobody fell. Not in that moment. In my kitchen, alone. I just pressed a button, and a recurring transfer that had run 71 times stopped running. It was the least dramatic moment of my life. What I felt was grief. I sat at my kitchen table and I cried the way you cry at a funeral, because that's what it was. I was burying the family I'd spent 33 years hoping for, not the family I had, that one had been dead for years, maybe never lived at all. I was burying the one I'd invented, the one that someday was going to look up and see me and say the thing I'd been paying to hear. That family was never coming. I'd known it for months. But canceling that payment was the moment I stopped paying for the funeral to be delayed. And underneath the grief, very quiet, was the other thing. Not triumph. Something smaller and harder and more durable. It was the feeling of being, for the first time in my adult life, the owner of my own number. The first number I had ever said to my family that I did not take back. The first time I had answered the question, do you love me or what I provide? By deciding I would stop asking people who would never say yes. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something because I genuinely want to know what you think. When a family loses the person who's been quietly holding everything up, when the money stops and the carrying stops and the budget finally walks out the door, what do you think they do? Do they wake up? Do they fall apart? Do they learn? Drop your prediction in the comments before I tell you, because I promise you, what actually happened was not what I expected, and I'd been living it for years. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what happened to the house because I know you want to know and because the answer is the most important part of all. I gave them notice. I'm not a cruel person. I didn't just vanish the money in the dark. I called my mother on the 8th day, and I kept my voice as calm as the family had taught me to keep it. I'm not going to be making the mortgage payment anymore, I said. I wanted you to have time to make arrangements. You have about 90 days before the bank moves. I'd start now. There was a silence on the line that lasted a long time. And then my mother said the thing I'll remember until I die. She didn't say, I'm sorry. She didn't say, we love you. She said, how could you do this to us? And I realized, standing in my kitchen, that she had genuinely no idea what she'd done to me. None. To her, the cruelty had all flowed one direction. From me, the daughter who'd suddenly, inexplicably withdrawn what was rightfully theirs. The 71 months were invisible to her. The hospital hallway was invisible. The 33 years were invisible. All she could see was the budget, refusing to budget. "I'm not doing anything to you, Mom," I said. "I'm just stopping doing something for you. There's a difference. I hope someday you can see it." And I hung up, gently. Stay with me, because what happened to all of them afterward is not the satisfying part you might be hoping for, and I need to tell you why that's actually the point. Here's where I'm supposed to tell you they lost everything and learned their lesson and showed up at my door on their knees. That's how these stories usually end. I owe you the truth instead. They didn't lose the house, not the way you'd think. My father, who had been retired for 3 years, suddenly found work within a month. Funny how that happens. It turned out the business hadn't been impossible to restart. It had just been easier not to when there was a daughter covering the gap. He took a job managing a hardware store. My mother, who couldn't drive at night to sit with her granddaughter in the hospital, got a part-time job at a doctor's office. They downsized, sold the big house on Linden Court, the one I'd paid for, and moved into a smaller place across town. The new place doesn't have a lawn big enough for 40 people. And Brooke's wellness business closed again that fall. With no one to float the next certification, she got a job at a salon, and from what I hear, she's good at it. And for the first time in her life, she's paying her own rent. They survived. They're fine. They did the thing they'd been telling me for years they couldn't do, the second they had no other choice. And here's the part with the $6,000, because I promised you it would come back. And it did, in the strangest possible way. That fall, an envelope arrived from Brooke. Inside was a check for $200 and a note. "First payment. I'm paying you back the certification money. It might take a while." $200 against $6,000 from the sister who'd told 40 people I was good for fetching ice. I sat with that check for a long time. I want to tell you what it was and what it wasn't, because it's the closest thing to a happy ending I've got, and I won't let you mistake it for more than it is. It wasn't an apology. She never used the word sorry. She never connected the money to the cookout, to the years, to any of it. In her mind, I think, the debt and the fight were two separate files, and she'd decided to tidy one of them. But it was the first time in 31 years that my sister had ever given me something instead of taking it. The first time she'd treated a thing she'd gotten from me as a thing she owed back, rather than a thing she was owed. That's not love, but it's the first cousin of respect, and from Brooke, it was an ocean. I didn't cash the check. I keep it in the same drawer as my mother's card, the museum of the family I almost had. But I texted her back 2 words, "Thank you." And I meant them more than I'd meant any of the thank yous I'd never been given. Because being paid back $200 by a woman who used to think I was furniture is, it turns out, worth more than the $6,000 ever was. It wasn't the money coming back. It was the smallest possible acknowledgement that I'd been a person all along. Stay with me, because that's as close to victory as this story gets, and I need you to understand why that's enough. I think about that a lot. For 6 years I believed I was saving them. I was actually just preventing them from saving themselves. The money I thought was a lifeline was a leash, and it was around all 4 of our necks, mine included. So, if you've been waiting for the part where they suffer, they didn't much. They adjusted. They're living smaller, more honest lives now, and I don't think a single one of them is grateful to me for it, and I've made my peace with that. Stay with me for the last part, because what I lost is real, and I won't pretend it isn't. And what I gained is quieter than any revenge, but it's the only thing I'd take back none of. I want to tell you what it costs, in case you're standing where I stood. I lost my family. Let me say that plainly, because every story like mine wants to rush past it to the freedom. I don't get the freedom without the loss. My parents and I don't speak. I haven't seen them in almost a year. They did not call when Paul came home from deployment. They have not met the milestones. Theo lost his first tooth. Ren started kindergarten, and the people who should have cared didn't know. There's a grief in that I'll carry forever. Walking away from a family that hurt you doesn't end the love. It just ends the access. The love sits in you with nowhere to go. Brooke and I text sometimes. Surface things, a birthday, a meme. She has never apologized, and I've stopped waiting for it, and that's its own small death. The sister I'll never have, who lives in the body of the sister I do. I love her. I will always love her. I will probably never trust her again. Both of those things are true and they don't cancel out. They just live side by side, the way most real things do. There was one more thing, and I almost didn't tell you because it complicates the clean ending, and I think the truth should be allowed to be complicated. About 4 months after the cookout, a card came in the mail. My mother's handwriting. I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes before I opened it because I knew that whatever was inside it had the power to undo me, one way or the other. It was a birthday card, a week early for a birthday she'd missed by a year the last time. Inside, in her careful cursive, she'd written, "We've had to make a lot of changes. The new place is small, but your father's keeping busy. I think about you. I hope the children are well." And then, at the bottom, the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from her. "I don't always understand you, but I never meant for you to feel like you weren't a part of things." I read it 4 times. And I want to tell you it healed something. But here's the complicated truth. It almost did. For one whole evening, I let myself believe it was a door reopening. I imagined calling her. I imagined Thanksgiving, the hope that stubborn animal sat up in its grave. And then I read it a 5th time, slowly, and I saw what wasn't there. There was no "I'm sorry." There was no "I see now what we did." There was "I don't always understand you," which puts the failure to understand on me, makes me the puzzle, the difficult one. And there was "I never meant for you to feel," which apologizes for my feelings, not for their actions. It was the most loving thing she'd ever written me, and it was still, underneath, the same message it had always been. The problem is how you feel, not what we did. I kept the card. I keep it in a drawer, not because it healed me, but because it taught me the last thing I needed to learn. That sometimes the door doesn't reopen, and the people on the other side aren't even sure why it's closed. That you can be loved, in a thin and crooked way, by people who will never, ever be safe to need. I didn't write back, not out of anger, out of knowing, finally, the difference between a person missing you and a person being ready to know you. Stay with me, because that card is the last test I passed, and passing it is what let me write the ending I'm about to. That's the bittersweet at the bottom of this. I didn't win. There's no version of this where I won, because winning would have meant having a family that loved me, and that was never on the table. The only choice I actually had was whether to keep paying to pretend. But here is what I got, and I want to name it clearly, because it's the only thing that matters, and it's easy to miss because it doesn't shine. I got myself back. I got a daughter who's starting kindergarten in a home where nobody is the budget. I got a son who asked me, 6 months after that 4th of July, completely out of nowhere, "Mom, are you happier now?" And I could look at him and say yes and mean it, and watch him file that away. That leaving something that hurts you is allowed, that you don't have to make yourself small to be loved, that the question, "Did we do something wrong?" has an answer, and the answer is no. I got Paul home, and a marriage where I'm a partner and not a provider, where someone asks me how my day was and waits for the actual answer. And I got, on the 15th of every month, a strange, small piece. Because that's the day the payment used to leave. And now, on the 15th, nothing leaves. The money stays. I usually don't even notice the date anymore. But the first few months I noticed, and every time I did, I felt the same quiet thing. It wasn't the money. It was never the money. It was the question finally going silent. For 33 years, I'd been asking a family that couldn't answer whether they loved me or what I provided. And on the 15th of every month now, the question doesn't get asked because I finally stopped needing them to answer it. I answered it myself. I'm worth more than what I provide. I always was. I just had to be the one to say it since no one else ever would. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this. Before you wonder why you're so tired, count the things you carry. Then notice who handed them to you and whether they ever once offered to help you set them down. Some people will only love you for as long as you're useful. The bravest thing you'll ever do is find out which people those are and walk away while you still have a self left to save. Thank you for staying with me through all of it. If any of this landed somewhere familiar, leave a comment and tell me about the thing you finally set down, or the thing you're still carrying and thinking about putting down. I read them all, and I promise you're not as alone as that family made you feel. I still drive past Linden Court sometimes by accident when the GPS reroutes me. There's a new family there now. Last summer, on the 4th of July, I saw they'd put up a tent in the backyard and strung lights along the fence, and the lawn was full of people, and somebody was laughing. For 1 second it hurt, the old way, the budget way. And then I noticed where I was. I was driving my own car, away from that house, toward my own, where my own kids were waiting in a yard I'd never have to pay rent to stand in. And I realized the lights and the laughter on Linden Court had never once been mine. I'd only ever paid for them. I'd never been invited to enjoy them. I turned at the corner and I drove home, and I didn't look back, the same way I hadn't looked back the first time. The heat came through the window, 91 degrees, the exact temperature of that last 4th of July. But it didn't feel like that day anymore. It just felt like summer, just the sun on my arm and the road ahead and the strange, enormous quiet of a woman who finally stopped being good for one thing and started being good for her own life.